There is a moment, recorded, verified, whispered in horror across Rome for generations, when a sitting emperor of the most powerful civilization on earth stood before the English Channel, ordered his soldiers to stab the sea with their swords, and declared victory over the god Neptune. His legions stood there, tens of thousands of armed men, stabbing water, and not a single one of them dared to say a word. That man was Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus. History remembers him by the nickname his father's soldiers gave him as a toddler when they dressed him in miniature armor and paraded him around the Rhine camps like a mascot. They called him Caligula, Little Boot. It was meant to be endearing. It became something else entirely. This journey is different. Using advanced AI techniques, we have transformed ancient engravings and paintings into vivid, lifelike scenes, allowing you not just to hear history, but to witness it. What you are about to hear is not a simple story of a man who went mad. It is something far more disturbing than that. It is the story of what power does to a human being who was never given the chance to become one. A child raised inside a machine of terror, surrounded by death, shaped by the very empire he would one day consume. The monster Rome crowned in 37 AD was not a sudden aberration. Rome built him, slowly, methodically, and then it forgot what it had done. Gaius was born on August 31st, 12 AD, the third son of Germanicus Caesar, one of Rome's most beloved generals, and Agrippina the Elder, a woman of iron will and relentless political ambition. From the outside, this was a family bathed in glory. Germanicus was everything Rome wanted in a leader: charismatic, victorious, adored by his soldiers. The crowds worshipped him. The Emperor Tiberius, his adoptive uncle, did not. Gaius spent his early childhood in military camps along the Rhine frontier, surrounded by the machinery of Roman war. The soldiers loved him, passing him around like a good luck charm in his miniature soldier's boots, Caligula, from which his nickname was born. But behind the warmth of that image was a family already being circled. When Gaius was 7 years old, his father Germanicus died in Syria. The official cause was illness. The unofficial story, repeated by Tacitus, whispered by senators, believed by Agrippina until her dying breath, was poison, administered on the orders of Gnaeus Piso, governor of Syria, acting either on his own ambition or at the quiet direction of the Emperor Tiberius himself. No verdict was ever reached. Piso died before the trial concluded, ruled a suicide, though the circumstances were deeply suspicious. Gaius was 7. He watched his mother receive his father's ashes. He watched her carry them home to Rome by ship, holding the urn in both hands, refusing to put it down. What that does to a child, historians cannot measure. But the years that followed began to answer the question. Tiberius, now consolidated in his paranoia, turned on the family of Germanicus with slow, methodical cruelty. Agrippina the Elder was accused of treason, exiled to the island of Pandateria, the same island where Gaius's grandmother Julia had died, and she starved herself to death there in 33 AD rather than survive under Tiberius's mercy. Gaius's 2 older brothers, Nero and Drusus, were similarly destroyed. Nero was exiled and died, possibly by forced suicide. Drusus was imprisoned in the Palatine, and according to Suetonius, starved slowly, reduced near the end to chewing the stuffing from his mattress. Gaius watched all of this. He was an adolescent. There was nothing he could do. There was everything he needed to remember. He survived by becoming invisible. He moved to Capri, to the court of Tiberius, and lived in close proximity to the aging, increasingly grotesque emperor, a man whose private villa on that island, according to ancient sources, had become a theater of cruelty and perversion. Gaius said nothing. He smiled. He performed gratitude. Suetonius records that no man was ever a better slave, and no man was ever a better actor. He learned to read every room. He learned that survival in Rome was a performance, and he became its greatest practitioner. When Tiberius died in March of 37 AD, suffocated according to some accounts, when his caretaker Macro pressed a pillow over his face as he briefly recovered from what had seemed a terminal illness, Gaius was 24 years old. The Senate exploded with joy. The people of Rome flooded the streets. They burned incense. They sacrificed animals. They shouted the name of Germanicus's son into the sky. Rome believed it was finally free. It had no idea what it had just unleashed. The first 7 months of Caligula's reign were extraordinary. He freed political prisoners. He recalled exiles. He burned the records of informants, publicly, theatrically, in the Forum. He gave the people games and spectacles. He grieved his sister Drusilla in public, openly, with a tenderness that moved crowds to tears. He was beloved with an intensity that Rome had not felt in years, perhaps decades. The historian Philo of Alexandria, who visited Rome during this period, describes a city genuinely transformed by hope. And then, in October of 37 AD, something happened. Caligula fell gravely ill. The nature of the illness is unknown. Ancient sources suggest a fever of dangerous severity, possibly encephalitis, possibly a nervous collapse. Romans across the empire held vigils. Citizens reportedly offered their own lives to the gods in exchange for his recovery. He nearly died. He recovered. And he was not the same man. What emerged from that illness, whether it was the fever itself that altered him neurologically, or whether the illness simply dissolved the final restraints he had spent a lifetime constructing, was something Rome had no framework to understand. The mask had held for 7 months. Now it began to slip, slowly at first, then all at once. The executions began quietly. Macro, the Praetorian prefect who had helped secure Caligula's succession and who had, by some accounts, personally ensured Tiberius never woke up, was charged with treason and forced to suicide along with his wife. The man who made Caligula emperor died by Caligula's order. A senator named Gemellus, Tiberius's biological grandson and Caligula's co-heir, was killed on the accusation of praying for Caligula's death during the illness. The evidence was that he smelled of an antidote, something he took, it later emerged, for a chronic cough. The logic did not matter. Nothing needed to make sense anymore. Caligula began referring to himself in terms that no Roman emperor had dared. He demanded to be addressed as a living god, not posthumously as Augustus had been deified, but now in the present while still breathing. He wore the attributes of different deities in public, the armor of Mars, the lightning bolt and aegis of Jupiter, the sun disk of the Egyptian god Sol. He reportedly held conversations with the statue of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill, pressing his ear to the stone and then whispering back responses. Whether this was genuine delusion or calculated theater designed to terrorize, ancient sources disagree, and the truth may be that even Caligula no longer knew the difference. His sister Drusilla, whom he had mourned so publicly, had been, according to Suetonius and Cassius Dio, his lover. Ancient sources make this claim explicitly, though modern historians treat it with some caution, acknowledging that such accusations were common political weapons in Roman historical writing. What is documented is that when Drusilla died in June of 38 AD, Caligula's grief crossed into the irrational. He declared her a goddess, the first Roman woman ever officially deified, and mandated public mourning on pain of death. Men were not allowed to laugh, not allowed to bathe, not allowed to dine with their families. Rome was commanded to grieve on schedule, or else. The Senate watched all of this and said nothing. What could they say? What could anyone say? The man with the legions decided what was real. By 39 AD, the reign of Caligula had transformed into something Rome's political vocabulary had no word for. The treasury, which had held a surplus of 2.7 billion sesterces when Tiberius died, was nearly exhausted, spent on games, building projects, feasts of staggering excess, and gifts designed to demonstrate divine generosity. To refill it, Caligula turned to methods that went beyond taxation into something closer to organized predation. He revived the treason trials that his first months had so publicly dismantled. Wealthy Romans were accused, convicted without meaningful defense, and executed, their estates absorbed by the imperial treasury. Suetonius records that Caligula was observed studying the lists of the condemned, not for their crimes, but for the value of their property, making annotations in the margins. He auctioned gladiators at inflated prices to wealthy citizens who dared not refuse. He opened a brothel in the Palatine palace and reportedly staffed it with the wives and daughters of senators, charging admission. Whether every detail in the ancient sources is accurate is a legitimate question. Suetonius wrote over 80 years after Caligula's death, and Roman historical tradition was not above embellishment, but the core pattern across multiple independent sources is consistent. A system of deliberate, calculated humiliation designed to remind every powerful Roman that they held nothing, owned nothing, and were nothing without his permission. He marched his legions to the Rhine and then to the coast of the English Channel in 39 to 40 AD, an apparent campaign against Britain and Germany that collapsed into the bizarre episode of the soldiers stabbing the sea. Ancient accounts differ on what actually happened. Some historians suggest it may have been a failed mutiny. Others a theatrical humiliation of troops who had refused to cross the channel. Others still a genuine eccentricity. What all accounts agree on is the image. Roman legionaries, the most disciplined military force in the known world, filling their helmets with seashells as spoils of war from the ocean, and carrying them back to Rome as trophies of a victory over Neptune. Caligula announced it to the Senate as a triumph. Back in Rome, the tempo of violence accelerated. Men were tortured in front of their families. Executions were staged as entertainments. He reportedly forced a father to watch his son's execution, and then immediately invited the father to dinner, forcing him to laugh and joke as though nothing had occurred. The father complied. He had no choice. That image, a man laughing at a table while his son's blood was still drying, may be the most accurate portrait of what Caligula had made of Rome. A conspiracy began forming in the shadows. It was not a single group. It was several: Praetorian officers, senators, freedmen in the imperial household, all circling the same conclusion independently, arriving at the same door. His former ally and Praetorian tribune, Cassius Chaerea, whom Caligula had repeatedly mocked in public for an allegedly effeminate voice, had reached a point beyond endurance. He was not alone. The only question remaining was when. The answer was closer than anyone in that palace dared to hope. January 24th, 41 AD. The The Palatine Games were in their final days. Caligula had attended the morning's performances and was preparing to return after lunch. The underground passage connecting the theater to the palace, a covered walkway used by the imperial family, was where Cassius Chaerea and a small group of co-conspirators positioned themselves. According to Suetonius and Cassius Dio, the moment came when Caligula was separated from the main body of his guards in the corridor. Chaerea stepped forward and demanded the day's password, a routine security exchange. Caligula gave it. Then Chaerea drew his sword and struck him across the neck. Caligula did not fall immediately. He turned, shouted that he was still alive. The others closed in. He received, by the ancient accounts, 30 separate wounds. He was 28 years old. His wife Caesonia was killed the same day. Their infant daughter, Julia Drusilla, was killed. Her skull fractured against a wall, according to Suetonius, by soldiers who reasoned that leaving the daughter of Caligula alive was a risk no one wanted to take. The family was erased with the systematic efficiency that Rome had always been capable of when it turned that efficiency on itself. In the Senate, the reaction was immediate chaos. Some called for the restoration of the Republic. The word was spoken aloud for the first time in decades, and for a few hours it may have seemed possible. But the Praetorian Guard had already found Claudius, Caligula's uncle, the limping, stammering, overlooked member of the dynasty, hiding behind a curtain in the palace, reportedly trembling in terror. They carried him out on their shoulders and declared him emperor. The Senate surrendered the idea of the Republic within hours. The machine was too large, too old, too deeply threaded through every structure of Roman life. It did not matter who sat at its center. Someone would always sit there. Caligula's body was buried hastily in a shallow grave, only partially cremated. According to Suetonius, the earth above his grave moved. Disturbed by ghosts, the Romans whispered, though the practical explanation was that the burial had been incomplete, the cremation unfinished. His official memory was condemned by the Senate in the process Romans called damnatio memoriae, the erasure of a name from public record, the chiseling of a face from stone. But you cannot erase a memory that has already burned itself into an entire civilization. They removed his name from the monuments. They could not remove what he had taught Rome about itself. Because the deepest horror of Caligula is not what he did, it is how long it took Rome to stop him, and how completely the machine continued functioning around him, through him, in spite of him. The Senate attended his banquets, the legions stabbed the sea, the fathers laughed at dinner. Every institution of the most sophisticated civilization on earth bent itself around one young man's disintegrating mind rather than resist him, because resistance meant death. And Rome had been taught, very efficiently, that survival was always worth more than dignity. Tiberius had taught them that. And Tiberius had taught Caligula, and Caligula had taught Claudius, and Claudius would teach Nero. The lesson passed forward like an inheritance no one could refuse. The boy in the little boots never really left those Rhine camps. He just grew up and kept walking until the entire world was his parade ground. And Rome, the eternal city, the empire of shadows, watched him pass and clapped. See you in the past.